Today we begin a series on Plato's Symposium. I have here the complete works of Plato by Hackett. The publisher is Hackett. Various people do the translations, and the same translation published by Hackett is available by itself in a much cheaper edition. You may be able to find a used copy for pennies, not counting shipping. And this is a recommended volume if you have any significant studying to do in Plato. Let's see, what else for the Symposium? There's probably at least one decent public domain translation on the internet. And I don't know, there could be half a dozen or more good English translations. And I don't really know much about other languages and the Symposium, but probably there is a decent translation in French and German and Spanish and Italian and some other European languages. I would like to think Chinese and Japanese, but I can't guarantee that. I'm guessing not Urdu, Swahili, Hindi, Korean, maybe Hindi. Anyway, I hope Korean. I don't know. I hope you can find a good copy in whatever language you read best in. In any case, without further ado, let's talk about Plato's Symposium. Plato's Symposium is one of those seamless integrations of philosophy and literature. Even Plato, who did a whole lot of integration, rarely achieved something like this. The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius, and maybe Thus Spake Zarathustra by Nietzsche, and maybe some things by Kierkegaard are the only things I can even think of that come this close to being a perfect mixture of philosophy, perfect combination of philosophy and literature. Anyway, the Symposium is a drinking party in ancient Athens in which Socrates and some other people give speeches in praise of love. And I think that's probably quite as much intro as I want to give. If my current plan holds, this video will probably air sometime after a longer video, maybe 40 minutes or something, going over the Symposium aired. You can maybe find that in the Great Texts playlist. Anyway, let's go to the beginning of the Symposium. The story is told by Apollodorus, but Apollodorus himself got it secondhand. He got it from Aristodemus. Aristodemus was at the party. He's our source for the story. But the person telling the story and our narrator is Apollodorus. So there are a few other complexities here. Some within the story as told by Aristodemus, and one or two outside the story. Outside the story, we have someone who in this edition is simply labeled a friend. I don't know if the camera will zoom in, but you may be able to see the word friend as a speaker there. I think you could think of the friend as the reader. Apollodorus is speaking to us. Apollodorus is speaking to the reader. And then there's Glaucon, who, as it happens, is the brother of Plato, and the main dialogue partner in Plato's Republic, with his brother Adeimantus speaking with Socrates. Socrates speaks more than anyone else in the Republic, but Glaucon is second, followed by Adeimantus. So Adeimantus and Glaucon are both brothers of Plato, and Glaucon has a small role in the introduction to the text. Apollodorus, speaking to a friend, an unnamed friend, or to us, the readers, Apollodorus says that he recently discussed this party with Glaucon. So Apollodorus got it from Aristodemus, who was there, and Apollodorus recently told Glaucon, and now he's telling us how he recently told Glaucon, and he is going to tell the story after all this introduction. Okay, so he says he was walking to Athens. He says, I was walking to the city from my home in Phaleron when a man I know who was making his way behind me saw me and called from a distance. And that was Glaucon, who was behind Apollodorus on the way to Athens. Now you may interpret this figuratively. Athens would be wisdom. Being on the way to Athens is being philosophical and pursuing wisdom, and Apollodorus is ahead of Glaucon. This is a figurative interpretation of this opening line that certainly seems to fit with the dialogue in the introduction. Maybe I can explain that in a moment. I don't want to say it's only figurative, but this is Plato. This is a thing where this is a text where we're likely to have a simple, straightforward meaning. Apollodorus says this because he was going to Athens. And Glaucon was on the road to Athens also, a little bit behind him. But also it can have a figurative meaning. Something literal, historical, can have a figurative meaning as well. If you prefer the word allegorical, close enough. Maybe not the best word, but close enough. All right, so Apollodorus has just been asked by the unnamed friend, or by us, the readers, to tell the friend, or to tell us about the famous drinking party where Socrates and others gave speeches in praise of love. And he says, in fact, your question does not find me unprepared. Just the other day, as it happens, I was walking to the city from my home in Phaleron when a man I knew was making his way behind me, saw me, and called from a distance, and that friend is Glaucon. And so then he goes over his brief conversation with Glaucon, where, to cut to the chase and try to wrap up this video and not make it overly long, Glaucon says he heard a badly garbled version of the story, and he wants to hear Apollodorus' version. And Glaucon wonders if Apollodorus can tell him, and Glaucon thought that Apollodorus had been there, and Apollodorus apparently has some reputation for knowing this story, but also Apollodorus specifies, no, I wasn't there, I was too young. I was, I think he says he was still a child when this actually happened, and he got the story from someone else. But he also says something interesting about his relationship to Socrates. Socrates is the great philosopher. At the risk of oversimplification, you could almost say Socrates is the founder of Western philosophy. That's not really true. There's a whole tradition of philosophy that comes before Socrates, but whatever. Yeah, it's one of those errors that's somewhat informative. Socrates is the founder of Western philosophy. Anyways, a super influential founder, a super influential character at the beginning of Western philosophy. And after Socrates, everyone is influenced by Socrates, directly or indirectly, more likely both, and in some various respects. Okay, so Apollodorus thinks that what Socrates does is terribly important. He says, I used to think, Apollodorus speaking to Glaucon, I used to think that what I was doing was important. But in fact, I was the most worthless man on earth, as bad as you are at this very moment. I used to think philosophy was the last thing a man should do. And Glaucon's like, stop joking, Apollodorus, just tell me when the party took place. Apollodorus continues, when we were still children, when Agathon won the prize with his first tragedy, it was the day after he and his troop held their victory celebration. So, context, back when the party happened, this famous drinking party where Socrates and other people gave speeches in praise of love, Agathon, who writes tragic plays, had just had his first tragic play performed, and there had been a victory celebration, and then they continue the celebration with a drinking party at Agathon's place the next day. So, Apollodorus, in addition to mentioning this, states that Glaucon is very foolish, because Glaucon thinks that philosophy is not the most important thing, and Apollodorus thinks it is the most important thing. Now, this is subtle. This is confusing. It looks like you could say that Apollodorus is on the way to Athens, figuratively pursuing wisdom, and he's further along than Glaucon, who is not as committed to the pursuit of wisdom as Apollodorus is. Apollodorus is like Socrates. He is pursuing wisdom. But on the other hand, when you read this story, the Symposium, you get this really strong emphasis on don't confuse means for ends. Philosophy is the pursuit of wisdom, and Socrates is the symbol of the ideal philosopher. And you're not supposed to mix up the pursuit of something with the thing itself. A thing that is an important pursuit of something is important only because the something is important. Philosophy is only important because wisdom is important. And that means anyone who thinks Socrates is important can be understood as thinking that the pursuit of wisdom itself is important rather than wisdom itself. And you can maybe think Apollodorus is like that. Let's see, this connects to Socrates' discussion of love with Agathon later in the text, where Socrates says, love is not a good thing in and of itself. It's something like a means to an end. Love loves beauty. What love loves is more important than love itself. Similarly, paralleling this exactly, in fact, what philosophy loves is more important than philosophy itself. Wisdom is what philosophy seeks. Wisdom is more important than philosophy itself. So I can read this and I can think, maybe Apollodorus doesn't get it. I think maybe a better reading is the initial reading, that Apollodorus does get it. He thinks philosophy is important, but he understands that philosophy is important because wisdom is important. Philosophy is important only for that reason. It's not important in and of itself. Now, I would say, provisionally, that's a good interpretation. Provisionally, let's say Apollodorus speaks properly. He's not idolizing Socrates or idolizing philosophy. He realizes that wisdom itself is the thing that matters. But I do confess I have my doubts. He says, it's been less than three years that I've been Socrates' companion and made it my job to know exactly what he says and does each day. Before that, I simply drifted aimlessly. Well, better to do this, perhaps, than to drift aimlessly. But is he still obsessing with Socrates rather than the wisdom that Socrates himself seeks? I don't know. Anyway, all these questions come up when you read the first page of a book by Plato and ask questions about it and consider possible figurative interpretations and mysteries about how the text is to be interpreted. In any case, let's move on and try to wrap up this video because it's already taking too long. Who told you about it? Was it Socrates himself? Asked Glaucon. And Apollodorus says he got it from the same source from which the source Glaucon got his garbled version got it. And that source is a fellow called Aristodemus from Kaidathenaeum, a real runt of a man who always went barefoot. He went to the party because I think he was obsessed with Socrates, one of the worst cases at that time. I think provisionally we assume that Aristodemus was improperly obsessed with Socrates. Maybe Apollodorus is too, but I think at least Aristodemus is. Aristodemus thinks Socrates is important, whereas Socrates will say, no, what I'm interested in is wisdom. The philosophical pursuit of wisdom, that's what's important, and that's only important because wisdom is important. Don't think I'm important in and of myself. I'm only useful perhaps for pointing the way towards the pursuit of wisdom, which in itself is only important because wisdom is important. So Aristodemus had given the story to Apollodorus. Apollodorus had checked with Socrates, who agreed with what Aristodemus had told Apollodorus. And Glaucon says, please tell me then. You speak, and I'll listen as we walk to the city. This is the perfect opportunity. Let's not try to interpret that figuratively. We just don't have time. But Apollodorus says that this is what we had talked about on our way to the city. Okay, now I can't help but interpret this figuratively. So simple historical, literal, or literary meaning is just the straightforward. Apollodorus is telling us he talked to Glaucon about the drinking party where Socrates gave a speech in praise of love, and other people did the same. And he was walking to Athens with Glaucon and talking to him about this. But, figuratively, maybe the real lesson here is this is the sort of thing you're supposed to be thinking about. This drinking party and its speeches in praise of love are going to give us ideas that are the sort of ideas we're supposed to be thinking about if we want to pursue wisdom ourselves. If you want to be a philosopher, what you're about to read in the Symposium is, if you want to pursue wisdom, if you want wisdom, the things you're going to read in the Symposium by Plato are the sort of things you ought to be thinking about. All right, now here I begin to, again, be more suspicious of the character of Apollodorus as actually getting it. Maybe he doesn't. He says, my greatest pleasure comes from philosophical conversation, even if I'm only a listener. Whether or not I think it will be to my advantage, all other talk, especially the talk of rich businessmen like you, bores me to tears. Implicitly, the reader, or if you, or the unnamed friend, is one of those silly people who cares more for, so to speak, the affairs of the world than for the pursuit of wisdom. Apollodorus says, I'm sorry for you and your friends because you think your affairs are important when they're really totally trivial. Perhaps in your turn you think I'm a failure, and believe me, I think that what you think is true. But as for all of you, I just don't think you are failures. I know it for a fact. Apollodorus has some humility, or something like humility. He realizes he's not important. What makes me doubt that he is fully committed to the pursuit of wisdom is he talks about his greatest pleasure coming from philosophy. Maybe, even if he's only a listener, but maybe it should come from being a doer and not just a hearer of philosophy. And maybe it should come from the hope of wisdom itself, not just the pursuit of it. I don't know. I have these doubts. Anyway, let's skip to the beginning of the story. Aristodemus meets Socrates, who had just bathed and put on his fancy sandals, both very unusual events. So he asked him where he was going and why he was looking so good. Socrates says he's going to Agathon's place for dinner. He had missed the victory party yesterday, but now he's going to the house of a good-looking man, so he has to look his best. The fact that Agathon is a very good-looking man is a thing that comes up later in the story, but let's leave it at that for now. Socrates says, I know you, Aristodemus, have not been invited to the dinner. How would you like to come anyway? And Aristodemus answers, I'll do whatever you say. So Aristodemus comes along with Socrates, and let's make a long story sort of short. Socrates gets delayed on the way because he's stopping and thinking, because Socrates is just that kind of weirdo. Aristodemus awkwardly arrives without Socrates, not having been invited, and Agathon welcomes him in a friendly way, unless there's some implicit mockery here. I don't know for sure. And Aristodemus says Socrates is coming, and Aristodemus says Socrates is coming. Agathon says, well, come on in. I'll send someone to get Socrates, and you go hang out with Eryximachus. You take the seat next to Eryximachus, or share Eryximachus's couch. And Socrates is found standing lost in thought on the neighbor's porch, and Aristodemus says, oh, don't bother him, he'll be along in a while. This is just a thing he does. That's just Socrates being Socrates. And Agathon says, okay, serve the rest of us though, blah, blah, etc., etc. And I think I'll stop there, and we'll get into the beginning of the conversation next video, and I will hopefully make it a little more streamlined. And Plato Symposium. Wonderful book. Highly recommended reading. And thank you for watching.